Good morning and welcome to our Bible study for this Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. We'll be looking at the gospel reading for this coming Sunday, which is the fifth Sunday after Epiphany. That is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. So if you have your Bible handy and would like to get that ready and look that up while I do some introductory remarks, you're quite welcome to do that. You can see that my background here is from a beach. It is specifically from Cherry Grove Beach in South Carolina, just north of Myrtle Beach, just barely south of the North Carolina line. I know some folks from church have been to Cherry Grove and know where it is. This picture is probably from a couple years ago. The pier in the background, the last I saw, had a big section out of the middle of it from a hurricane that went through. But I thought this might be a nice break from the snow and the cold weather that we see outside to get a glimpse of the beach. You can see it's not a real warm day at the beach there. The folks in the background that are walking along the edge of the water do have some coats on, though I'm sure it's probably not as cold as it is here right now. But again, a little nice, maybe day brightener to get a look at the beach while we are looking at some snowy and wintry conditions here around us. Today, February 3rd, is also the commemoration of Ansgar, as we are looking at commemorative days and saints' days throughout the church year. Ansgar was the Bishop of Hamburg, missionary to Denmark and Sweden. I thought about maybe a background of a Big Mac or McDonald's, since he was Bishop of Hamburg, but I just thought maybe that wasn't appropriate. So again, we are commemorating Ansgar, Bishop of Hamburg, missionary to Denmark and Sweden. He was born in 801 near Amiens in France on September 8th, which is one day away from my wedding anniversary. In 820, he began years of missionary work in Denmark and Sweden. In 831, he began service as Bishop of Hamburg and Bremen in Germany. And in 865, he died in Bremen on February 3rd. And so our commemoration today. Just a little bit about Ansgar. The monk Ansgar spent many years evangelizing the pagan peoples of Northern Europe. He is credited with having built the first Christian church in Sweden. He is honored as the Apostle of the North, despite the fact that most of his efforts bore no visible fruit, for paganism returned to the areas where he had preached. He models Christian perseverance in the face of apparent failure. Perhaps a good role model for some of us who maybe, I don't feel particularly that my work hasn't borne any fruit, but I'm sure there are those out there who feel that way. Ansgar, again, a model of perseverance. Quote from Ansgar: "If I were worthy of such a favor from my God, I would ask that he grant me this one miracle, that by his grace I would make of me a good man." And so, wanted to be a good man. Apparently he was. We commemorate him in the church. And, I have my ancestry is Swedish in part. So I give thanks to Ansgar for his Christian work in Sweden. That perhaps had some, some far-reaching effect on my own faith and where I am now. So, again, I ask if you enjoy these Bible studies, if you like taking part in them, please share them on Facebook, forward them in your email, do whatever you can to get the word around. Not so much that I think people need to see me, but I hope we have a meaningful word to share. And again, this is basically push button evangelism. You hit share, you hit forward, the message goes to many more people than we would ever reach in person. So if there is one benefit to this COVID situation. It is that we have gotten into more digital technology, more ways to share the gospel. And again, I ask that you take advantage of those ways as well. Our task force, our COVID task force, will be meeting again about a week from yesterday, actually exactly a week from yesterday, February 9th. By then, we should have heard from the bishop, Bishop Jim Dunlop, with some more guidance from himself, from the synod. We will be again looking at when we will resume in-person service, depending, not only on what the bishop has to say, but what we see as far as the numbers in the community, the numbers at the hospitals, how things are going. Again, we have a pretty broad scope of folks on that task force, folks who are out in the public, folks who are in the hospital business. And so we will be hearing from those. We'll be having another meeting and make a decision as to when we might be meeting again in person. One thing we do know for sure, on Ash Wednesday, February 17th, 2 weeks from today, we will not have in-person worship. We will have a recorded Ash Wednesday service, as we've been doing for Sundays. You can take part in that service whenever you would like during Ash Wednesday. You will have a couple choices for imposition of ashes. There are actually kits that can be sent to your home so that you may impose ashes on the folks in your household or on yourself if you're there alone. That is one option, and we can have you either pick those up at the church or we will deliver them if you choose. The other option will be a drive-through imposition of ashes here in our church parking lot. And we will be doing that between noon and 1 p.m. and between 6 and 7 p.m. So you'll have two opportunities for drive-through ashes. We will be imposing the ashes with cotton balls, fresh cotton balls for each person. So there will be a limited contact as much as possible so that we can have the imposition of ashes on Ash Wednesday. Again, some of this may seem like overkill to some folks, but we feel that we would rather be a part of the solution than contribute in any way to the problem of the COVID spread. And so we are doing everything we can to be safe, to be sure that we're not among those who are continuing to spread the virus, even as we await the vaccines and other things that we hope will curtail the virus soon into the future. And also, I've mentioned a couple times using Zoom for our Wednesday Bible study. I have been using Zoom. That's how I get these backgrounds that I've been doing. I haven't invited anyone to join in this, but if you would be interested in joining in a Zoom Bible study, a more interactive Bible study, we would do that on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. This is actually when I'm recording this right now. And that Zoom Bible study would be recorded. And so folks who don't have the opportunity or don't have the means to participate in the live Zoom meeting would have the opportunity to watch that later and participate in it in that way. So if you would be interested in doing an interactive Zoom Bible study and you would and you're okay with having that recorded and sent out to folks on our email list and also on our Facebook and website pages and YouTube, please email me, revjperson, REVJPERSON @gmail.com. And I will add you to an invitation list, and we will seriously consider doing some interactive Zoom Bible studies. So that's pretty much all I have as far as announcements for today. Again, if there's anything that you would like to see done differently with these Bible studies, or, always feel free to email me, call me at the church, call the church office, whatever. We value your communication. And so please be in touch with us any way that you can so that we can offer the best worship and learning experience, the best faith formation that we're able to offer. So again, please be in touch with us, keep us informed as to things you would like to see us do or not do as far as Bible study and worship and whatever else is going on here at the church. So our gospel reading for this week is Mark 1, 29 to 39. And I will first share that with you, and then we'll have some comments. As soon as Jesus and the disciples left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. So again, this message picks up pretty much where we left off last week. Jesus has called the disciples, Simon and Andrew, James and John, and he is beginning to go about his, what we know as his public ministry. A couple things in the introduction. If you download the bulletin on Sunday, you'll get to hear this introduction, you'll get to see this introduction. I want to share this introduction with you because there are some very interesting comments here in the introduction. And this is from the folks at Sundays and Seasons, from where we get much of our worship material. Everywhere Jesus goes, many people expect him to set them free from oppression. So here we raise the question of expectations. What do we expect of Jesus? People expected Jesus, if he was the Messiah, to free them from oppression. And they were thinking of oppression from Rome, oppression from the occupying forces of the Romans who were in control at that time. What do we expect from Jesus today? Do we have high expectations of Jesus? Do we not have high enough expectations of Jesus? Do we expect Jesus to do whatever we want? Do we expect Jesus to know what Jesus knows is right? While I think we cannot expect Jesus to simply do our will and do our bidding, we must be careful not to set our expectations of Jesus too low, because Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Savior. Jesus is the Son of God. So it doesn't hurt to have high expectations of Jesus because Jesus can do amazing things. So that first sentence right here in the introduction, again, it talks about what we expect from Jesus, something that we need to consider as we look at this reading for this week. Everywhere he goes, he heals them and sets them free. He is meeting their expectations in one way. He is setting them free from sickness, disease, demon possession, perhaps not from oppression by the Romans, but he is setting them free from many personal afflictions and demons from which they suffer. An image that I really like here in this introduction is the next sentence. It says, Disease, devils, and death are running for their lives. Imagine that picture. Here comes Jesus, and we often think of Jesus as, mild-mannered, quiet, um, you know, not very aggressive. And yet here he has disease, devils, and death running for their lives. They fear him. We know from last week's reading, from this week's reading, the demons, the often recognize Jesus, the evil spirits recognize Jesus before anyone else does. And they are running for their lives. I just love that image. The forces that diminish human life are rendered powerless by Jesus. What are the forces that diminish our human life today? Of course, we still have illness. We have demons of sorts. We have oppression. We have prejudice. We have discrimination. We have many things that diminish our human life. We have poverty in many places. And so we need to remember, as we look at our expectations of Jesus, that those forces that diminish human life, those things that make life less than it could be, are powerless in the presence of Jesus. And so when we turn to Jesus, when we count on him, when we have expectations of him, these things are not as nearly as frightening as they might be. Now, again, we pick up where we left off last week. Jesus and the disciples were in the synagogue, confronted by a man with demons. This week, they leave the synagogue, and where our verse says, as soon as they left, it is literally immediately. Immediately. And this is something throughout Mark's gospel. Mark is a fast-moving gospel. Mark has Jesus do many things immediately. Again, showing the power of Jesus. Jesus doesn't have to stop and wait. Jesus doesn't have to take time to consider. Jesus does things quickly, immediately. They left the synagogue. This is still the Sabbath, and it will remain the Sabbath until chapter 3. So this is many things happening on one day in Jesus' life. At the very beginning of his public ministry. This is a busy, busy day for Jesus. They entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Now, this is an interesting statement that, again, we saw last week. Simon and Andrew were fishermen, but we don't necessarily have to think of them as poor or poverty-stricken or lowly, because they owned a house. Perhaps as brothers, they owned the house together, but they did own a house. So they did have some means of support. They were, probably very successful fishermen. They had James and John with them, and this turns out to be Mark's inner circle throughout Mark's gospel. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. What we'll see over and over again, they are the ones closest to Jesus. For whatever reason, be it their personality, their leadership capabilities, whatever. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, Simon and Peter being the same person, are Jesus' inner circle in Mark. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed, so we know Simon was married. Peter was married. Interestingly, the word for mother-in-law is panthera, much like our word panther. Does it say anything about how mother-in-laws were regarded in those days? I don't know, or is it just a coincidence? But Peter's mother-in-law, so we wonder, he was married, he had a wife. We don't know if he had any children. And when we're told that the disciples left everything to follow Jesus, did they walk away from their families? We know they never really got very far from their hometowns. We know that Jesus geographically was really somewhat limited in his ministry. Um, and perhaps as we, just speculation, of course, but we know that there were many women who attended to Jesus. We read in the scriptures there were many women who attended to Jesus and were his disciples. And so perhaps if some of the disciples were married, their wives came along and helped minister to Jesus and the other disciples. Maybe even whole families. We don't have anything that tells us it wasn't that way. It is possible that it could have been. In the patriarchal societies that were in control, the cultures that had control of, at the time those Gospels were written, at the time the Bible was solidified, quite possibly felt that women and children were not important enough to mention. We know even from Jesus' own ministry, when children were brought to him, the disciples tried to keep them away. And Jesus said, "Bring them to me." So again, just speculation. Perhaps, though the women and children, perhaps there were whole families who followed Jesus and not just these 12 men who we often think of as disciples. Simon's mother-in-law had a severe fever. Well, that's why she would have been in bed. And they told Jesus about her at once. So, while everyone else had expectations of Jesus, the disciples did as well. And knowing that Jesus could heal her as he had healed others, he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Now, to us, this doesn't seem like perhaps such a big deal. Whenever we meet someone, whenever I, as a pastor, go to visit someone in the hospital, we often join hands. We often pray together that way. Many times when we visit someone who isn't feeling well, pre-COVID, of course, now that we're into COVID and we know how quickly it can spread, we know how contagious things can be, we are much more careful about how we make contact with one another. But, under normal circumstances, the fact that Jesus took her by the hand and helped her up doesn't really seem like a big deal. But again, in the society of Jesus' day, it was a very big deal. For a rabbi to touch a woman was off limits. For a rabbi to touch an unclean woman was even worse. And so we see Jesus had no regard for the ritual purity. Excuse me. Jesus wasn't really concerned about the ritual purity, about what was right and wrong, what was acceptable and not acceptable. Jesus' concern was for the welfare of this sick woman, and he was giving her what she needed to get well: his touch, his compassion, his care. And so he, again, put the ritual purity aside, thinking of, during this COVID pandemic, we have, some of us have looked at Martin Luther's writings on ministry during the plague, during the Black Plague of Luther's day. And, Luther said that pastors should stay and care for their constituents. They should stay, but if people were already being cared for, there was no sense for another pastor to put themselves in danger. So even Luther recognized limits in our human side, but he also recognized that as the church, we are called to care for God's people. And sometimes that means perhaps not throwing caution to the wind, but maybe stepping over some boundaries and beyond some boundaries that might ordinarily be expected, especially when we talk about the COVID-19 protocols and how people need care during this time. Let's see. the fever left her. It let go of her. It no longer had control of her. And here again, we see this idea of disease running from Jesus. It let go of her. It took off. It ran away. This disease left go of her. It was no longer in control. And she began to serve them. Now, this is interesting. Again, in our society, if someone has just recovered from an illness, we might expect to serve them and not have them serve us. But again, in that society, it was a privilege to serve. Um, part of the idea of discipleship is that as we are healed from the power of sin and death, as we receive salvation from Jesus, part of discipleship now is serving Jesus and serving others by sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. It was an honor to serve, especially as the senior woman in the household. Her social standing was restored. Again, social status was a big thing in those days. And for her to not be able to serve her guests as the senior woman in the household would have certainly been a disgrace, an embarrassment to her that she couldn't serve her guests as was expected. And so Jesus not only restores her to health, he restores her back to her social standing. And this again is something that Jesus does. Social well-being, social health, community well-being, community standing, all those things are important to Jesus, as well as physical and spiritual health. So what we see here is, first of all, there's no mention of the woman's faith. Jesus doesn't say her faith has made her well. He doesn't ask her if she believes in him before he heals her. It is simply the power and authority of Jesus. It is God's grace, God's abundant and unbounded grace extended toward this sick woman. And, Jesus doesn't require anything of her. He simply gives. He gives of himself. He gives of his authority. He gives of his power to heal her. And she in turn then serves Jesus and the others. So we see here that Jesus has power over demons. He has power over fevers. He can heal a man. He can heal a woman. He can work in the synagogue. He can work in the home. Jesus basically has power over anything in any place. Jesus' authority is universal. Jesus has universal authority. Anytime, any place, Jesus can do what Jesus feels needs to be done. Now, our reading really sort of has three sections here. We just finished the section on the healing of Simon's mother-in-law. We then have a change of scene. It goes to that evening. And we see that evening, which is really the beginning of a new day, that sick are healed. And people are bringing sick people to Jesus. He heals them. And then finally, the third section is when Jesus goes off to a lonely place to pray. And we'll talk a little bit about how those three sections relate to one another. Sundown actually begins a new day for these folks. Again, the Jewish day begins at sundown. So their Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday and goes to sundown on Saturday. And, perhaps not a bad idea to begin your day with a good night's sleep and wake up rested and refreshed in the morning. They bring people to Jesus, and all who were sick or possessed with demons. Again, we have Mark using a bit of hyperbole here. Everyone who was sick or possessed with demons. We don't know, was it really everyone, everyone in town, everyone nearby? But again, there was probably a large number of people who came to Jesus. Again, great expectations of Jesus. Here it is, sundown. Most people will be getting ready to turn in for the night. and yet they are bringing all these people to Jesus wanting to be healed. And just a little linguistic thing here. They were sick or possessed with demons. I don't know if there were any who were sick and possessed at the same time. It sort of relates to the idea that demons did not cause illness, as might be expected. Demons caused perhaps mental illness. Demons caused many problems in people's lives, but Mark differentiates here between sickness and demon possession. There are two different things. They were either sick or possessed. And the demons are any forces that are beyond our control. Evil forces, demons are things that take the place of God in our lives. We have, again, many demons in our own lives. Some perhaps more severe than others. But again, to remember, Jesus has power over them all. And healing isn't always a cure. It's healing is sometimes we are healed spiritually, we are healed in our heart, perhaps if not in our body. And we must remember to depend on Jesus. So often we say we believe in Jesus, we depend on Jesus, but then we act like it's all up to us. I've heard us say that we are functional atheists, that we say we trust God, and yet we try to do things ourselves. Now, that's not to say we don't have some responsibility for ourselves. We do have much responsibility for ourselves. But again, trust in Jesus and have high expectations of Jesus, I think, is important. So he healed them. Let's see. He cured those who were sick and with various diseases and cast out many demons. Again, as you see, we have this bit of a dichotomy here between sickness and demon possession. Those who were sick were physically ill. Those who were demon possessed were perhaps socially ill, mentally ill. They had different problems than those who were physically sick. And they had various diseases, and Jesus, he cured them all. He cast out many demons by his own power. He didn't have to call on help from anyone. He didn't do any magic rituals. He simply cast them out. And he would not permit the demons to speak. Again, if you remember last week, Jesus told the demon, be quiet, because there is power in words. He would not let the demons speak. He exercised authority over them. Just shut up. How much authority does it take to make someone be quiet? And Jesus simply did not permit them to speak. He had that much authority, that much power over them, that they would not speak in his presence because he told them not to. He commanded them not to speak because they knew him. And again, we have something known as the messianic secret in the scriptures. This idea that Jesus would not allow himself to be identified or didn't want people to identify him as the Messiah at this early in his ministry. Interestingly, the demons know who Jesus is. The readers know who Jesus is, but the characters in the story don't know who Jesus is. And so if we look back at the telling of the gospel, put ourselves in the place of the people who were there, not knowing who Jesus was at that point or who Jesus is, it can be much easier for us to understand why they didn't get it. We're reading this as history. We know what happened. We have 2,000 years of history to look back on. But people in Jesus' day didn't know that. So again, the demons recognized Jesus. We as the readers recognize Jesus, but the characters in the story still don't know who Jesus is. And so he doesn't let the demons talk about who he is because people might get the wrong idea. It's not time yet for Jesus' real identity to be known. People might see Jesus as a magician. They might see him as a sorcerer, a wizard of sorts. But it's not until Jesus gets to the cross that we recognize his healings, etc., are an inbreaking of God who is seeking us. So we got to get to the end of the story. We have to know the result. We have to know about the death and resurrection of Jesus before we can really understand what's going on. Here is God seeking us through Jesus' power and presence. So Jesus then goes off to a deserted place to pray. The enormity of the suffering that Jesus has witnessed, so many people who are sick, so many people who are possessed by demons, it seems to have taken a toll on Jesus. We see a couple other times in the Gospels where he goes off to a deserted place by himself. After feeding the 5,000, again, another tremendous miracle, one that certainly took much energy from Jesus, if you will, something that placed a great demand on Jesus. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he goes off by himself to pray, knowing what lay ahead, that his suffering and death was imminent. In these times when Jesus' ministry takes a great toll on him, he goes off to a deserted place to pray. Again, if Jesus needed to pray, how much more do we need to pray? If Jesus needed some time alone, how much more do we need some time alone? Even an extrovert, those who are energized by being around people still sometimes need to take some time to be by themselves, to connect with God, to reflect on their own life, their own ministry, and to take that time to refresh themselves and be prepared for further ministry, which is exactly what Jesus does here. He goes off while it's very dark. He goes to a deserted place, and there he prayed. He connected with God. He seeks God's will again in his life, perhaps asking God, as we often do, why? Why is there so much sickness? Why do these people suffer? We don't know. Perhaps Jesus is seeking those same answers. And as he's off praying by himself, his companions hunted for him. And this is sort of a vivid image. They tracked him down. They were anxious to find him. They wanted to know where he was. And they said, everyone is searching for you. Again, that hyperbole, everyone. People wanted to know where Jesus was. And so, in essence, they want Jesus to go back to the people. And we'll see how Jesus' actions are in contrast to that idea of going back. He answered, let us go into the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. Rather than go back to where he had just been, Jesus now wants to move forward. He wants to spread the word. He wants to carry the message to others. Again, this is a great image for us as the church. So often we look back and say, oh, why can't things be like they used to be? But now, and especially now, in this time when technology is becoming so important, this time when in-person worship has been curtailed in the church, this time when so much is different in the church, we must not look back in the sense that we need to go back to the way it was. We can look back as far as tradition. We can look back at the good things and build on those things. But we must, as far as ministry goes, look forward. We must go into the neighboring towns. We must go out and proclaim the message. And as Jesus says, that is what I came out to do. Again, Jesus came out. He came out as identifying himself as the Son of God. He performed signs and miracles to show that he truly was the Messiah. He came out to do battle with the demons and the illnesses, which are now running for their lives. Again, I love that image. And he went throughout Galilee proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. We must proclaim the message. The church is great as far as social ministry goes. The church is great for helping people, but we also must remember that we do it in the name of Jesus Christ. There are many government agencies that help people. There are many, nonprofit agencies that help people, simply because it's the right thing to do. The church does it because this is what Jesus calls us to do, and we must proclaim that message along with the social services that we give. And so we must be clear that this help is coming from the church. This help is a gift from God, and proclaim that message just as Jesus did. The message that he proclaimed at the beginning of the gospel, repent, believe the good news, the kingdom of heaven has come near. That is the message that Jesus is proclaiming, not going back to the people where he already had been, but going ahead and expanding his ministry in as many people and places as he can. So we have some great images there this week, some great things to see how they might turn out in a sermon. And so hope you are able to tune in on Sunday to see our worship service, or sometime during the week, and join us in worship. Again, please share these messages if you feel they are worthwhile. And let me know, again, revjperson@gmail.com. Let me know if you would like to be invited to take part in an interactive Zoom Bible study in the near future. Let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you again, and farewell from virtual Cherry Grove Beach, South Carolina.